The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Thursday, October 13th, 2016. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you decided to spend a little time arguing with me or agreeing with me. Depends on what night it is and obviously on what topic it is. But I thank you. I do appreciate it. I appreciate everyone who watches, shares, listens, subscribes. We can't do it without you. Also want to thank my patrons. Absolutely couldn't do it without our patrons. And two new patrons overnight. Thanks to Nicholas K. Nicholas, thanks for becoming a patron. We appreciate it. And at Foosballs of Fire on Twitter. It's a great name. At Foosballs of Fire. Check him out on Twitter. He has a YouTube channel, I believe, that he's putting together, and he's doing politics, and he became a patron. And I wonder if he calculated that if he uses his @ handle, I'll have to give him his @ handle on Twitter a shout out. So I'll become no, I'm messing with you, man. Go follow him though. Go check him out. Why not? He supports me, so let's check him out. Let's see what he has. All right, the news and other shenanigans. 857-600-0518 when you're ready to join the conversation. We'll probably take some calls in a minute. So let's start with Michelle Obama. Why not? Why the hell not? And it's going to go into a whole lot of conversations that I probably shouldn't go into. I really shouldn't bring Twitter beef or Twitter arguments into the show, but I'm petty. But first, before we do any of that, let's listen to a few seconds of Michelle Obama on Donald Trump.
So while I'd love nothing more than to pretend like this isn't happening and to come out here and do my normal campaign speech, it would be dishonest and disingenuous to me to just move on to the next thing like this was all just a bad dream. This is not something that we can ignore. It's not something we can just sweep under the rug as just another disturbing footnote in a sad election season.
Yeah.
Because this was not just a lewd conversation. This wasn't just locker room banter. This was a powerful individual speaking freely and openly about sexually predatory behavior and actually bragging about kissing and groping women, using language so obscene that many of us were worried about our children hearing it when we turn on the TV.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, it now seems very clear that this isn't an isolated incident. It's one of countless examples of how he has treated women his whole life. And I have to tell you that I listen to all of this and I feel it so personally. And I'm sure that many of you do too, particularly the women. The shameful comments about our bodies.
Wow.
The disrespect of our ambitions and intellect. The belief that you can do anything you want to a woman. It is cruel. It's frightening. And the truth is, it hurts.
Wow.
It hurts. It's like that sick, sinking feeling you get when you're walking down the street, minding your own business, and some guy yells out vulgar words about your body. Or when you see that guy at work that stands just a little too close, stares a little too long, and makes you feel uncomfortable in your own skin. It's that feeling of terror and violation that too many women have felt when someone has grabbed them or forced himself on them and they've said no, but he didn't listen. Shit. Something that we know happens on college campuses and countless other places every single day. It reminds us of stories we've heard from our mothers and grandmothers about how back in their day, the boss could say and do whatever he pleased to the women in the office, and even though they worked so hard, jumped over every hurdle to prove themselves, it was never enough.
Wow. My goodness. So to be honest, 100% transparent, I had not listened to that much of the speech. I only got the first 60 seconds of the speech. And the first 60 seconds of the speech was powerful enough. But Michelle put that thing into context. And, you know, here's the problem that I have with everybody. And trust me, sometimes I get upset even with myself. So don't think I'm just being judgmental. But in order to not allow this to be a bad week for Trump, which to some feel like that equals a good week for Clinton, and in order to prevent Clinton from having a good week, most people I would say most people in social media world tried their best to downplay what came out last Friday. And they accomplished it by saying, well, these were just Donald Trump's words versus Bill Clinton's actions, right? As though a guy who's telling you that I can grab a woman by the boop, you know, I can just do whatever I want, as though that is not almost a direct confession, right? But I'll leave that alone. But because Bill Clinton is a creep, which he is, right? The disgusting man that Bill Clinton is, people distracted away from the reality of what was said by a man who's poised, who could be the next president of the United States. And what that means to people, men and women, but overwhelmingly women, by magnitudes of order, the women who have been sexually harassed, catcalled, sexually assaulted, and outright raped. And because of Bill Clinton, Hillary couldn't say anything about it. Not for real, right? I mean, some of you may sure of that. Hillary can't say anything about it because Bill is such a pervert, right? And Hillary was complicit, or whatever you want to call her, doing in the 90s, protecting Bill, whatever. So they couldn't say anything about it. So what ended up happening is we in our own way normalized a presidential candidate being able to talk about women in this way. Not just talk about women, but talk about sexual assault in this way. We normalized it because Bill Clinton is a pervert and Hillary Clinton didn't believe the accusers. So Hillary couldn't say anything about it. So they sent out Michelle Obama to really remind us that this was not this should not be a little thing. And it should not be normalized simply because the husband of the woman running for president is a sleaze, just as much of a sleaze bag, right? I think Donald Trump said, well, Bill and Clinton and I on this, we go golfing, and Clinton has said far worse than I ever said. I believe you. I think we can all believe that Bill Clinton is, if not just as bad, worse. Because he strikes me as a guy who thinks his power can get him anything he wants. That's exactly who Donald Trump is. So I think they probably were, when he said this is locker room talk, he probably was in the locker room talking with Bill Clinton at the golf course, right? I get it. Both of them are just as bad. But do we take away from the reality that this happens to so many women that we probably could never know? Not only will we never know, but we could never know the number of women that have been groped, sexually assaulted, and couldn't report it because who is going to believe them? One, and two, this man is powerful. This man he's the boss. So Michelle Obama, I want to thank her for putting this back out here, because the issue itself, separate from the election, the issue itself is, no, you can't separate it from the election. I correct myself. The issue is magnified by the fact that this is a person who's poised to be the next president of the United States, or potentially could be the president of the United States. Now, maybe, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard. It is difficult. And I'll say it for me, it was difficult for me to identify with the problem because I personally have zero understanding or connection or identification with forcing yourself on a woman. It just does not compute, right? You know, it doesn't. It makes no sense. Nor have I been one of the people who catcall and yell at women because it just, you know, my calculus is a little different. I know for a fact that if I'm hollering at a girl across the street and I'm catcalling, that there is a negative chance that she would ever be interested in me. And because my goal was always to meet a woman, see if she's interested, let's go hang out, do what we do, I would never have catcalled. It just doesn't make sense. And because I have no personal experience with it, I never knew or never conceded that it existed on the gross magnitude that it did. I never, because I never saw it. I never participated in it. And so you take it for granted that it doesn't exist until you actually talk to a woman and you ask them and you listen and you hear them. And even then it wasn't enough until I saw it myself, until I got to Boston. And I didn't see catcalling until I got to Boston and I saw it one-on-one. You've heard the story plenty of times. I won't recount it again, but I saw a guy go from zero to an orangutan to a Neanderthal in less than 2 seconds because a woman with a nice body walked by. And so it's difficult. I said all that to say it's difficult for some of us to even accept that catcalling, sexual assault, rape is a problem. It's difficult all by itself. But then when you mix it in with the cesspool of an election that we have, it's that much easier to use it as a political football to say, you know what, Bill Clinton is a pervert too. And so we completely erase the fact that there are millions of women around the world, around America, around the world, but in America, millions of women in America who have experienced someone doing this to them. And now hearing this from a man who could potentially occupy the White House. It's not something to just dismiss and throw away because it's politically inconvenient if you like or if you dislike Hillary Clinton or if you support Donald Trump. It's politically inconvenient, but it's so atrocious for us to just kind of casually walk by it as though it was just a news cycle kind of thing, because this has been, and I'll share you a story of a friend, young guy that I know, that I used to work with, who put it into context from his mom. He said that it was a point he didn't really believe it was a problem so much until his mom told him she was glad that she was getting older because finally people stopped catcalling her. So I don't know. It's really an ugly thing that we don't like to talk about, and it's even uglier the fact that it's been elevated now to phase 2, part 2 of this conversation. It's been elevated to a complete fiasco. So the New York Times, I can start here. The New York Times actually put out an article discussing 2 women who accuse Donald Trump of sexually assaulting them. So the New York Times published the account of 2 women who described unwanted sexual advances by Trump, followed by a third account that was published in People magazine. Donald Trump has subsequently threatened to sue them. And the Trump campaign described the entire New York Times article as quote unquote fiction that amounted to character assassination. The Trump campaign told People magazine, "This never happened. There is no merit or veracity to this fabricated story," close quote. We have, this is another quote, "We have substantial evidence to dispute these lies, and it will be made public in an appropriate way and at an appropriate time," Trump said. Jerry Falwell, Liberty University. I mean, this guy is really throwing everything he has behind Donald Trump. I think he's going all in, right? He's like, it's all or nothing. Jerry Falwell said that he has evidence that these people are lying, and that evidence is to be revealed. I don't know when. But this is one last thing that Trump said. He said, quote, "Let's be clear on one thing. The corporate media in our country is no longer involved in journalism. There are political special interests and no different than any lobbyist or financial entity with a total political agenda. And that agenda is not for you. It's for themselves. And their agenda is to elect crooked Hillary Clinton at any cost, at any price, no matter how many lives they destroy." Well, I mean, that's not totally inaccurate, to be fair, right? Because one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be fair. It's not totally inaccurate. I mean, if you look at the Podesta leaks, you'll see that, you know, there's a lot of sandbagging taking place with the media and with Hillary Clinton's campaign. So to dismiss that notion would be totally inaccurate and unfair and biased. So that last sentence is not necessarily. That last sentence is pretty true. It's hyperbolic, but it's true. However, that does not absolve Trump from the reality that chances are, Trump, according to your confession on tape, this is stuff that you've done, right? These are things you literally confessed to the world that you confessed to Access Hollywood that later got out to the rest of the world that you have sexually assaulted women. So, yes, I think both of these things can exist. Yes, the media is doing their best to help Hillary Clinton get elected. I don't think any objective person can say that the media is not trying to stop Trump. They would categorize it as they're trying to stop Trump, right? But the net total is they're helping Hillary Clinton get elected. That's true. At the same time, Donald Trump, you bragged about sexual assault. So why would we not believe these women, the account of these women? All right. So what's interesting are the letters. And these, I would say, these are some pretty great letters to read. These are letters from Trump's lawyers and from the counsel for the New York Times. I just want to read some of the language because it was actually kind of fascinating to read yesterday or today. And according to Donald Trump's lawyers, they say to the New York Times, they say, your article is reckless, defamatory, and constitutes libel per se. It's apparent from, among other things, the timing of the article that it is nothing more than a politically motivated effort to defeat Mr. Trump's candidacy. And they also said clearly the New York Times is willing to provide a platform to anyone wishing to smear Mr. Trump's name and reputation prior to the election, irrespective of whether the alleged statements have any basis in fact. And finally, their conclusion to the New York Times was, we hereby demand that you immediately cease and any further publication of this article, remove it from your website, and issue a full and immediate retraction and apology. Failure to do so will leave my client no option but to pursue all available actions and remedies. All right. That's Mr. Trump's attorneys. Mark Katzowitz of Katzowitz, Benson, Torres, and Freeman LLP. He came back and, well, I'll let you judge for himself. So from the New York Times to Donald Trump, the attorney states, the essence of the libel claim, of course, is the protection of one's reputation. The essence of a libel claim. That's an important word. All right. Mr. Trump has bragged about his non-consensual sexual touching of women. He has bragged about intruding on beauty pageant contestants in their dressing rooms. He acquiesced to a radio host's request to discuss his own daughter as a piece of ass. Multiple women not mentioned in our article have publicly come forward to report on Mr. Trump's unwanted advances. And he goes on and on. This is the part I want to read. We did what the law allows. We published newsworthy information about a subject of deep public concern. If Mr. Trump disagrees, if he believes that American citizens had no right to hear what these women had to say, and that the law of this country forces us and those who dare to criticize him to stand silent or be punished, We welcome the opportunity to have a court set him straight. I have to read it again because I really fudged the last sentence, which was the best part. If Mr. Trump disagrees, if he believes that American citizens had no right to hear what these women had to say, and that the law of this country forces us and those who would dare to criticize him to stand silent or be punished, we welcome the opportunity to have a court set him straight. In terms of legal letters, that's the clapback. That's a serious clapback. So here we have two tensions, right? We have Donald Trump he absolutely has to assert the falsehood of these. He has to say these are lies, and he has to call it libel. And he has to defend his reputation, whether it's true or not. He has to do it. That's what he's going to do. Likewise, the New York Times is saying, listen, we're covered. You know why we're covered? Because you bragged about doing the exact thing these women said you did, right? And you not only did you brag about it, but then you talked about your daughter as being a piece of ass. So they're saying, basically, you can waste your time. We could take this to trial. Sue us if you want to, but the court is going to set you straight. And to be honest with you, his lawsuit is going nowhere. It's just kind of a political posturing to try to push back, but it's not going anywhere because of everything they outlined in their letter. So that's the news of Donald Trump and this, and so ultimately, why does it matter? I mean, the lawsuit in itself kind of matters when you think about what happened to Gawker, when you think about the ability of people with a lot of money to actually sue media outlets out of existence, right? Gawker is going bankrupt and they are done. DOA. Now, granted, Gawker is not New York Times, and Gawker is, quite frankly, some people would agree that should have happened, but that's an argument for another day. But I mean, it really does matter, because if this is something that he said he did, and then people come out and say, yeah, he did it to us, what is the media supposed to do? Not report on it? No. They save that. They save that for the Podesta emails. That's what they're not going to report on. They're going to report on Donald Trump. They're not going to report on the Podesta emails. All right. So let's take this caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and/or question?
Hey, Ben, it's Bryce. I did love Michelle's speech. It was important, and I understand about Hillary and WikiLeaks and everything that's coming out, and all of it is important. But the stuff with Trump is a little bit slightly more important, just because of what some women go through. I've seen women get hollered at and talked down and things of that nature, and then it's just messed up, it's wrong, and I know it'd be difficult to talk about, but it's important that we talk about it and deal with the situations. And that really why it's a little more important that, yes, we have corruption and, we understand a lot of things that have taken place, but when it comes to certain issues like this is a little bit bigger. And I know some people have said, well, where was Michelle and them about, certain issues with, obviously with Black Lives, and they're talking like this about this, but not about this. And I understand that. I understand everything. It's I guess, a complicated situation on all levels. But I think that we got to stop. The main thing, I think we just got to just focus on what's going on now. And don't get me wrong, all the criticisms are due, but I just think that sometimes we just deflect from what's really we need to be talking about, and when I guess on what's happening. But I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think. Thanks for the call, man. I think it depends on what's important to you. I think what happens is people want to impose their priorities on you, right? Because for some people, and I'm saying this across the board because I do the same thing. I think everybody does this. My priority is just kind of esoteric, but most people try to impose their priority on you. And for a lot of people who are in my audience, their priority is, can't believe the level of corruption that comes from Hillary Clinton. So that's the number one thing that's most important to them. Then you have some others who say, oh, Hillary Clinton's going to start World War III. That's the most important thing to them. I think it's utterly ridiculous, and we've unpacked that extensively this week. I'll try not to unpack it for a fourth night in a row. But, you know, to them, they think Hillary Clinton's going to start World War III. So how could anything be more important than that? Then you have some people who feel like Donald Trump is the worst threat in American history. And so for them, all that matters is opposing Donald Trump. And my thing is this: you can't really dictate what's important to anybody. Last but not least, hang on. You have some people who honestly look at Hillary Clinton's tax proposal and economic policy and say, this is best for me. You have some people who look at Donald Trump's, and rightfully so. If you're making over a certain amount of money, getting Donald Trump elected is the way to go. Right. So not everyone who's voting for Trump is a complete buffoon. Everybody has different priorities, and everybody, it seems like, and this is the hyperbolic part, right? This is a hyperbolic statement. It seems like everybody is trying to minimize what is a priority to someone else in order for their priority to take precedent. We all do it. The most important thing to me is to cut through that kind of bullshit. And I really wish everybody could just if we could just cut through that level of bullshit right there and recognize that everyone has a different set of priorities. What's a priority to them does not make them evil, a sellout, unless their priority is to actually like literally kill you. But you know, most rational human beings, they have a set of priorities, and that's what's important to them. And that's all they can focus on. That does not make them evil, does not make them the enemy. That just means something is more important to them than it is to you. So, you know, listening to you, Bryce, you're saying that this sexual harassment, the sexual assault issue sounds like it's most important to you. I think it's a really big deal. I think it's a huge deal that can't be dismissed. But I'm not going to impose that on top of your hierarchy, because everybody else is going to be like, yeah, well, and this is where you get, right? You know, Hillary Clinton goes on live television and she body slams the cute puppy. And I announced that on the news or on Twitter, and someone comes back and say, yeah, but Donald Trump is the worst thing in the world. So forget about that, right? Likewise, Donald Trump goes on TV and eats a puppy live. I mean, cuts that bitch up and just sautés and eat that motherfucker live. And I can report on that on Twitter, and people are like, yeah, but Hillary Clinton. And it's like, everybody just chill the hell out. There are competing priorities, and what's the number one priority to you does not have to be the number one priority for someone else. And that does not make them the devil. Because you know what that sounds like? This is what I thank you, Bryce, because you're going to get me in trouble. Why not? I lost, I think, 500 people this week. I'm welcome to lose more. You know what that is? You know why I hate that kind of attitude that much? Because that's what a religion is. That's exactly what religion does. If you don't put this at the top of your priority, and if you don't obey these set of rules and these set of laws, and if you don't go with this ideology, you're going to hell. And there's nothing else to talk about. You guys have just, not all of you, right? Let me, too many people have replaced religion with a political ideology, and you're carrying yourself the exact same way. And me personally, I fight against that type of bigotry in my religion too much to actually submit to that same type of mental bigotry, that same type of mentality and bigotry in politics. I'm good. I'm solid. In other news, I guess this is the last thing I'll say about it. No, I think I said enough. Let's move on. Okay, so here's an amazing story, a sad story, kind of a scary story. Like, I did not realize on my way home last night that my life was in danger. I didn't realize. And I'm sorry, I'm laughing. Folks, please forgive me. I laugh at the most inappropriate times. I'll just give you that disclaimer now. It's actually a really disturbing story coming out of Boston. We left the studio last night, and the police were everywhere. I mean, we couldn't turn a corner without running into just a legion of police officers just swarming the entire area. And I went to drop off my assistant. We got to get a better name than assistant. I don't like calling it that. I went to drop him off at the train station, and the police were everywhere. And I'm like, me just being me, I'm like, they ain't gonna bother me, and if nothing else, I'm dropping off a white dude. So, they got to think that, either we were out here tricking with each other or we're not criminal. Right. So I'm just oblivious to the fact that we have this insane presence of police officers. Turns out this hasn't really made national news, so I haven't really seen it anywhere. Turns out 2 police officers were shot. They were not killed, thankfully. They were shot last night by a black man who, I'll put his picture on the screen, who, if I put on this hat, no, wrong picture. Hang on. That's definitely not the picture I want. If I put on this hat, what number is it? GFX? Oh, no wonder. Okay, folks, I apologize. I'm like, why is this not working the way it's supposed to work? Because of this. Okay. So this gentleman, to tell you the story of the news. So, Kirk Figueroa, 33-year-old, right in my age group, shot 2 Boston police officers. Both are still in critical condition. Kirk was a Boston constable. And being a constable, that means it's like a mailman. He delivers civil processes. He had no right to own a gun or possess that gun. He was involved in a domestic dispute last night with his roommate, and the 2 police officers came to investigate the domestic dispute, and the roommate opened the door to the police. Kirk Figueroa, I'm just going to call him Kirk, put on a bulletproof vest, took his shotgun, and shot the 2 police officers. And this happened right around the corner from the studio, and it happened right about the time at the end of the show. So he was shot and killed, but they were still searching for somebody last night after the fact. So one of the roommates was upstairs. There was a third roommate who was upstairs sleeping, and he could hear the gunshots that woke him up. And he realized that the screaming and yelling that he heard was his roommate dying from his gunshot wounds. And he said, quote, it wasn't until later that I really noticed. I just heard my roommate die. To hear the screams, it's chilling. So it was just really a weird incident last night where I was telling my assistant, telling him to be careful because something's obviously going on. But he was in no danger because they were looking for a black guy. And as he got on the subway last night, he could see that they were talking to all the black men there. And thankfully, I was able to get the hell out of Boston and get to the South Shore and not be involved in this investigation. So I'm grateful, very happy that the police officers did not die. There is Officer Santolo, who's a 27-year veteran, and Officer Morris, a 12-year veteran. They are in critical condition. I think we would, and this is a very unfortunate statement about the media, we would most certainly have heard this everywhere across the country had those 2 police officers died. Those 2 police officers were dead, then this would be instantly national news, instantly politicized. And if you go to this guy's, what was his name on something ridiculous. Oh, it's in here. Let me see if I can find his name. So if you go, Coco Zango. If you go and find he's a rapper, or he was a rapper, and if you go to his social media page, you can see that he was very eclectic. He shared content about heavy metal bands. He shared content about police shootings. He shared last night at about 9:50, right before this happened, he shared a speech by Michelle Obama. I didn't want to say it, but I'm just keep it, hey, to thine own self be true. So like if these officers had died, and I hope a speedy recovery, but if they had died, this would be on every news station across the country. And this would be seized upon politically because of all of the favorable Barack Obama stuff he has on his page. There was something about the Trumps that he shared on his page, or that he was a fan of Trump. But this just shows you, man, it's just crazy on so many levels. To think that this guy just snapped when the police officers opened the door, according to the roommates, it's it's crazy. And I don't know if I have anything else to say about it, but y'all be careful out there. That's about all we can say. All right, let's go to some international news because that's where we've been all week and kind of like being there more than anything else. So last night, another thing happened before we left last night. So last night we talked about it almost seems in a retaliation to the U.S. involvement in Yemen or their support of Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia's bombing of a funeral over the weekend that killed 140 people. Last night we discussed the cruise missiles that were shot towards U.S. Navy destroyer ships. And the captains and the ships, they were able to defend themselves and no one was hurt. The ships were not damaged. The cruise missiles did not make it to the ship. 2 missiles were shot on Tuesday, two missiles were shot on Monday, and a single missile was shot on last night. Last night we discussed why, some of the reasons Yemen may do this, and one of it was, only rational thing I can think of was to bring attention to America's involvement in the war. I almost slipped up and said civil war because that's what people are trying to describe it as, but this is an onslaught from Saudi Arabia. It's not a civil war. And thinking maybe Yemen was bringing attention to this by drawing America into it. Yesterday we discussed from the Wall Street Journal the fact that America has decided to place their involvement under review because of the funeral bombing that killed 140 people. And we discussed that this could quickly suck up or end all goodwill towards Yemen from the United States. Now, that last point I think is kind of irrelevant, only because who cares about your goodwill when you're helping Saudi Arabia bomb us out of existence? Also, yesterday we reported that Navy officials discussed retaliating. Well, before we left last night, they retaliated. And they shot, let me get the, so the same warship that was targeted on Sunday was also targeted again. The Pentagon said that its destroyer, the USS Sanity, launched Tomahawk cruise missiles targeting the coastal radar sites controlled by the Houthi group in quote-unquote self-defense. The Pentagon press secretary Peter Cook said in a statement, "Those who threaten our forces should know that the U.S. commanders retain the right to defend their ships, and we will respond to this threat at the appropriate time and in the appropriate manner." It's the same exact language that Trump used about suing our revealing that, the same exact language. Interesting. So no sooner than we left discussing this last night, the U.S. did retaliate. They blew up radars. So essentially they are neutralizing the Houthi rebels' ability to target the destroyer. There was another account of what happened from NPR that really shows you the kind of attitude that America has with regard to their involvement in Yemen. NPR reported that America considered these attacks to be unprovoked. And that's a huge slap in the face for anyone who realizes or is remotely aware of what Saudi Arabia is doing to Yemen. It is anything but unprovoked when you consider that the United States is providing logistical support to Saudi Arabia in their proxy war with Iran inside of Yemen. So it just shows you the attitude and the very screwed up attitude that America carries in a lot of regards to our involvement overseas. That's the nicest way I could say it without profanity. But then it goes back to our bigger question of, again, that we discussed last night. And this is what I want to kind of throw on the table for discussion here. Why the hell does the United States still hold so tightly, cling so closely to Saudi Arabia when you consider that Saudi Arabia, according to Hillary Clinton's emails, is a funder of ISIS, or if when you consider, I believe 15 out of 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabian. When you consider their financial involvement, when you consider their ideological differences, right? And I just did not know this until tonight, but the previous king who just died, 15 daughters. He has 15 daughters who are under house arrest because they spoke out about the treatment of women in Saudi Arabia. So not only is Saudi Arabia complicit in very real threats against the United States, but they're just the antithesis of what we like to say our American values are. And yet we're in lockstep with Saudi Arabia, to the point where President Obama spoke positively and just glowingly over their dictators, as though no one's going to notice that this person that you say has done so much for the cause of peace has actually done so much for the cause of undermining peace. So I'm in my mind, I'm like, why are we willing to not only ignore our best interest, to ignore our ideological interests, but not only to just ignore it, but then actually to open our mouths and actively say stuff that's just not true about Saudi Arabia? If there's anyone in the region that we should have a strained relationship with, I mean, there's a couple of people, but Saudi Arabia should be on that list as well. And sadly, it really is as simple as the amount of oil that Saudi Arabia produces. That's simply it. That's the bottom line. There's really there's nothing, that's it. And that presents a problem. That presents some cognitive dissonance here, right? And that's what I want to kind of talk about, this cognitive dissonance. You consider that America has switched over. We're producing, I believe, 9 million barrels of oil a day. We've become a net exporter. We are producing as much oil, or just about as much oil, as Saudi Arabia, right? And a part of that is fracking. And you think about all the things that we could do to get ourselves off of our dependency to these dictatorial regimes, these abusive regimes that require us to get involved in these proxy wars that are bombing Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the world. And you mean to tell me we're still involved with them because of oil? Now, here's the question. I'm just going to ask the question, and you guys do with it what you please. If we could sever our ties with Saudi Arabia, and one of the things that helped us sever those ties with Saudi Arabia was fracking, where would you fall? How would you answer? What would you rather deal with? I already know the answer for a lot of you, but I want to actually know what you would do. If you could cut ties and we could treat Saudi Arabia as a state sponsor of terror, and we could go after them for their human rights violations, and we can cut this pathetic relationship that we've had with them since before Franklin Roosevelt, if we could cut that, but the only way we could cut it was through becoming fully independent and included in that energy independence was fracking. Would you say no to fracking and say yes to Saudi Arabia? Or would you say no to Saudi Arabia and say yes to fracking? It's just a mental experiment. It's just a thought experiment. Don't lose your shit over it. Just answer, let me know which one would bother you the most. Now, considering how much we're producing, it still begs the question, why are we still maintaining this relationship? Well, perhaps we're not going to jump and say, okay, we're producing so much oil now, so now we can cut our ties with Saudi Arabia. It's going to be a process. But just think about the implications of it, right? Think about the implications of how far we're willing to go with a nation that undermines our best interests, all because of oil. Not the first time. It's not a revolutionary thought. But when you consider the alternative, how many people would tolerate Saudi Arabia, their proxy war, their human rights violations, they would tolerate that over fracking? Or how many people would tolerate fracking over Saudi Arabia? So I'm very interested in reading your comments. Leave that in the comment section. Tell me what you think. And then also, I just thought of course, Saudi Arabia stands in complete solidarity with Palestine. So that's usually something. So it really presents a picture of the reality that I'm guilty of, and I think a lot of people are guilty of. Sometimes we oversimplify the geopolitics of a region and the domestic politics within that nation, and we oversimplify our relationship with a particular nation, right? A lot of times I have seen, and I'm afraid maybe I'm just running into some really crazy circles, but I've seen people who like to oversimplify the relationship between America and Saudi Arabia as just being one about, I don't know. I've heard all kinds of theories that I don't even want to regurgitate on the show, but it really presents a problem of how do we get off this relationship with them? And that's what I want to hear your feedback on. All right. In other international news, while I read your comments, Scotland. This is a very interesting story. So Nicola Sturgeon, the head of the Scottish National Party, announced that she would publish an independence referendum bill next week. This will be the first step towards a second referendum on Scottish independence. So I believe the first referendum was a little over a year ago, very recent. So the previous, actually, no, not a year. It was 2 years ago. So and the no vote won with 55%. It's interesting to see if this would turn, and if it turns the second time around, would it turn on the fact that Britain is leaving the EU? That's what I'm wondering. That's the curious question. So now would the Scottish people decide that now that Britain has taken them out of the European Union, do we now say together, do they all say together, okay, let's get our independence? And then would they subsequently turn around and try to get their own membership in the EU? So it's unclear how the European Union itself would have responded. So due to the independence movements in other European Union states, they could have made Scotland's life difficult. They still can actually make it difficult. Just because they get their independence from Britain does not mean that they would be accepted or even qualify to be accepted or get the vote from the other member states to be accepted inside of the European Union. There's some interesting points here. During the Brexit vote, the UK as a whole has voted to leave the European Union, but Scotland voted in favor of the UK staying. So Scotland by itself, 62 to 38%, with all 32 council areas backing Remain. So Scotland overwhelmingly wanted to remain. So clearly they are going to seek, it would seem that they would seek their own independent membership inside of the European Union. But here's what's different this time around. If Scotland were to hold a second referendum and become independent, it could apply to be a member of the European Union in the standard way without going through. Okay. So it is now more plausible. I want to read this to you. It is now more plausible that the European Union member states would try to speed up the process for Scotland than it would have been at the time of the 2014. And this is according to the BBC independence referendum. The BBC reports that unlike in 2014, facilitating the Scottish European Union membership would not be now seen as creating a kind of incentive for a member state to split up, given that the UK is leaving the EU anyway. So it's interesting in the sense of timing also, right? If you consider that Britain, they are in the process of leaving the EU, and this process literally could take years. Once they invoke Article 5, they have 2 years to actually negotiate their exit out of the European Union. If the European Union, if the Scots get their own independence, right, and then they apply for the European Union, the timing will more than likely, let me just say out front, the timing will probably not match up. But the idea of Britain, quote unquote Britain, being able to vote on whether or not, if they're still inside of the EU and they haven't fully exited yet, it's fascinating to think if they would have the ability to vote on Scotland's membership to the European Union. More than likely they would abstain, but it would just be an interesting thing to see timing wise if this referendum actually came to a vote, and if they voted positively to leave Britain, the United Kingdom, then they would be up and have the opportunity to seek independent membership, individual membership inside of the European Union. It would be just a fascinating story to see how that plays out. All right. Last but not least, and I have no idea what time. Oh, we only have 5 minutes. I almost don't have time for this last story. Okay, so what I'm going to do, there's no bonus show tonight. Tomorrow is the full hour bonus show. So full hour Friday. If you want to be a part of what we do on Fridays, just become a patron, patreon.com/the BPD show. And you could become a patron, buy me a coffee a month, $3 a month. And you can get access to not just the new material, but all the old material. And what I want to do right now, though, since I have a few minutes left and I don't have enough time to start a new story, I'm actually going to go to the chat room. I would love to see how people answer that question on the fly. Let's see if anyone answered that question. Let's see what anyone said. Oh, yeah. Wow. They had a lot to say. Let's see. Let's get the Yemenis are apparently claiming the missile attack on the Saudi base and also another strike against Yemen, but not claiming an attack on the U.S. ship. Okay, thanks for that update. Wahhabism, yes, is spread by the Saudis, the most fundamentalist of fundamentalists interpretation of Islam, most certainly. The whole story. I wish Intercept had something about this. Yes, I'm looking for your. Give me a second, people. I'm just going through. Seeing what you said about here in California, toxic fracking waste is being dumped into our aquifers and our food crops are being grown with toxic fracking waste. It's putting our health at risk, and I very much want it banned. Absolutely. I mean, consider consider the impact, right? Let's talk about the geopolitical influence that Russia has in Europe. Let's say Europe was able to completely cut themselves off of Russia's oil, right? Imagine the shift geopolitically. Imagine the shift in general, right? If the world players were able to wean themselves off of, not wean, but separate themselves off of oil coming from the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, 40% coming from OPEC. Imagine the shifting in geopolitical interest. So the question is, what's more important, right? Because that is, I want to say, an opportunity, a possible reality, but really it's more of a thought experiment than anything else, because something tells me even if we did frack our way to energy interdependence, we would still maintain cozy relationships in the region just in case. Let's see. It's not as dangerous as so many people think. Fracking equals global warming. It's an integral step towards greener energy. All right, somebody actually stood up for fracking. Interesting. Enlighten the chat room on what she needs to. Okay, not many. I wonder if you guys are still grappling with it. So I'll give you some time. We're going to cut the show. Give you some time. I want to know if, because our number one reason for maintaining this perverted relationship with Saudi Arabia is oil, would you exchange this relationship with Saudi Arabia if the price was fracking? Would you say yes to fracking and no to Saudi Arabia? Or would you maintain this relationship with Saudi Arabia and say hell no to fracking? And then later on, I'll give you what I think, what I would do. All right, folks, it's been a pleasure. As always, I will see most of you on Monday. All the patrons, I will see you tomorrow morning. Take care.
The Benjamin Dixon
Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
It's Ben Dixon!
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.